So here we are, entering into part two, Eros. And so we're going to start this Life Against Death. Eros is, let's see what he says about it. Freud's two instincts, Eros and death. So we could already assume that Eros is it's a creative force. It brings things into it brings things into resonance, into energetic form, into presence. So sexuality and childhood. As we saw in the first chapter, it is in our unconscious repressed desires that we shall find the essence of our being, the clue to our neurosis. As long as reality is repressive and the clue to what we might become if reality ceased to repress. The results of Freud's exploration of unconscious can be summarized in two formula. Our repressed desires are the desires we had unrepressed in childhood, and they are sexual desires. In analyzing neurotic symptoms and dreams, Freud found that they invariably contain a nucleus representing a return or regression to the experience of childhood. But according to the whole hypothesis of repression, the consciousness which comes into conflict with the unconscious is the product of education. The consciousness which comes into conflict with the unconscious is the product of education. It follows that children are in some sense unrepressed, or to put it another way, in the child, the conscious and the unconscious are not yet separated. It was therefore that natural to infer that the adult in flight from repressive reality and dreams and neurosis regresses to his own childhood because it represents a period of happier days before repression took place. Furthermore, Freud found that analysis of neurotic symptoms invariably led not only to patient's mood, but also to his sexual life. The symptom is not merely a substitute for a pleasure denied by reality, but more specifically a substitute for sexual satisfaction denied by reality. So this is like core Freud, in which everything's related to a sexual core. We come over here down at the bottom. See right here. On page 28, right here, it's this part is not subordination to the reproductive function characteristic of sexuality wherever it appears, not only in human beings but also in animals and even plants. Adult animals seem to have what Freud calls genital organization. Will Freud say that in their case, genital organization is an unnatural tyranny? Freud, there is the body, but then our sexual um, eros is fixated on parts of the body. So we have all sorts of parts of the body. It's not just the genitals. So let's keep going. These objections take us to the root problem of distinction between men and animals. Psychoanalysis must maintain that there is a qualitative distinction between men and animals, but the distinction is based on what is perhaps only a quantitative phenomenon, namely the peculiar prolongation of infancy in the human species. In the case of man, the prolongation of infancy and the postponement of puberty give infantile sexuality a longer period in which to mature. And at the same time, parental care shelters it from reality principle. So we even have this relationship to parental care and the relationship of the singular body without parent. There's this part right here I highlighted a while back. Thus, Finchel, the ability to obtain full satisfaction through genital orgasm makes the physiological regulation of sexuality possible, and thus puts an end to the damming up of instinctual energies with its unfortunate effects on the person's behavior. This appearance of finding the solution to the world's problems in the genitals has done much to discredit psychoanalysis. Mankind, from history and from personal experience, knows better how perilous the pitfalls are that lie on both sides of the psychoanalytic path, and can be seen in the sad career of Wilhelm Reich, a man with keen insight into the sociological implications of psychoanalysis. He founded on the theory of infantile sexuality, as do the Neo-Freudians, and end up in a glorification of the orgasm as the solution to all society and social and bodily elements. So Norman O'Brien is trying to take us away from focusing too much on the orgasm, and actually trying to open up the interpretation of what is the sexual device that arranges reality. Freud sees conflict in his earlier theory between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. In his later theory between eros and death and the genital act itself, he distinguishes for pleasure and in pleasure in sexual intercourse. So this is important too. The for pleasure and the in pleasure in sexual intercourse. The romanticizing and the waiting of the longing, of the desire, and there is a consumptive nature in the possession of end pleasure. So for pleasure and in pleasure in sexual intercourse. For pleasure is the preliminary play with all parts of the body, the dance, the improvisational act. As artists, how do we encourage the magnetism, the aura of play? How do we enter as a poet? How do we allow the reader to freely interpret? As a musician, how do we allow the listener to freely listen? As the painter, how do we let the viewer freely view art? In a way, how does the artist or the poet divide his body up to be 20 bodies, 100 bodies, that all can equally have intercourse with their audience, in which they are the artist, in which they are the audience? Their art releases them, neither to create nor to destroy, but to continue the for pleasure. So Norman O'Brien's trying to have us look into what is more than sexuality, and sexuality is more than intercourse of two bodies in the act of intercourse. Intercourse can be transferred to all types of artistic expression. The poet has intercourse with his language. Then his language is in a book form. The book now has intercourse with his church. And the relations compound each other. The forepleasure is the preliminary play with all parts of the body and represents a perpetuation of the pure polymorphous perverse play of infantile sexuality. The pure polymorphous perverse play of infantile sexuality. The end pleasure in the orgasm is pure genital and post-pubertal. From the Freudian point of view, subordination of forepleasure to end pleasure in sexual intercourse is a compromise concealing a conflict between the desire of the immortal child in us for pure polymorphous play. This is the end game. The language of the polymorphous play, and the is Norman O'Brown's key nirvana word. His nirvana word is polymorphous play. It is what I was talking about earlier, in which the poet has intercourse with the book has intercourse with his what do you call it, the churchgoers, the people that come into the groups that come to have intercourse over the book. The ritual, the performance is another name for intercourse. Higher forms of intercourse from the poet transforming into the priest. From the Freudian point of view, the subordination of forepleasure, in-pleasure, and sexual intercourse is a compromise casino conflict. This conflict explains the fact that while it is not true, as the church father said, it is true of human animal, the immortal child in us is frustrated even in the sexual act by tyranny of genital organization. Hence the attempt to overthrow genital organization in certain practices of mysticism. Mysticism being able, as Freud said, to grasp certain relations in the deeper layers of the ego and the id, which would otherwise be inaccessible. So we have another word. Everybody knows what the mystical is. The poet is inevitably has to be mystical. The poet has to seek deeper layers in his language to create the new words, the new sentences, the new objects, the new mediums for new poets to enter. It's a new game, a new polymorphous play the poet has to keep to bring in. The heretical Christian sect known as the Adamites, who sought to recapture in this life the innocent eroticism of Adam before the fall, practiced coitus, intercourse without orgasm. That is to say, pure forepleasure. Intercourse without orgasm. That is to say, pure forepleasure. If he knew psychoanalysis, Needham would not be so puzzled that in the Taoist mysticism should have been considered so valuable for mental health. For Freud, the clue not only to normal adult sexuality, but to our whole repressed and hidden ultimate essence lies in the infantile sexuality. This is not a proposition of which we take kindly. Ignorance and fear, both of them, the results of repression, together with noble illusion, fostered by the higher aspirations that we are all soul and no body, set in motion one or another of a number of mechanisms of intellectual flight, whenever the topic of sexuality is taken seriously, if deference to the scientific attitude has induced a certain broad and open-mindedness towards general topic. The specific details are more than we can take, and we slip into the evasion of abhorrence or amusement. We are likely to withdraw our willingness to listen when we are told that infantile sexuality is polymorphous, perverse. And Freud must mean that polymorphous perversity is the pattern of our deepest desires. How can this proposition be taken seriously? If we divest ourselves in the prejudice of our surroundings, the perverse, if we try to objectify and analyze what infantile sexuality is in itself, we must return again to the definition. Infantile sexuality is the pursuit of pleasure obtained through the activity of any and all organs of the human body. Infantile sexuality is in itself, we must return again to the definition, the pursuit of pleasure obtained through the activity of any and all organs of the human body. So defined, the ultimate essence of our desires and our being is nothing more or less than delight in the active life of all human body. The active life of all human body. And so if we go to the end of this section where right here, hence there is for Freud a final contradiction between the reality principle and our unconscious desires. Here is the source of Freud's pessimism and the central problem for anyone who takes Freud seriously. Hence, anyone who takes Freud seriously must follow him into the closest anatomy of the desires of childhood, in his terminology, infantile sexuality. Even in childhood, according to Freud, human love can be seen going out beyond itself and finding its first objects in the world, the mother. Our analysis of Eros. Even infantile eros is incomplete until we have analyzed this love of objects in the world, how it originates, and what is its aim. If you remember in the other chapters, Freud talks about these three types of neurosis: the dream, the other one was madness, the one that's locked up in the asylum, the schizophrenic, and then the third was just the functioning schizophrenic or civilization. These are all mysteries. And one of the biggest mysteries is going back into our childhood. Honestly, how do we dig into one's childhood? How do we activate the memory of childhood? We may have to activate it through solitude, silence. We have to quiet all three of those mysteries, like dream, like schizophrenia, madness, like the intent of civilization, being good in the world, surviving. How does the child survive? How far back can we go